Good evening and welcome to Best Listener Ever. The time right now is 6 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. I'm your host for this presentation. I'm a 68-year-old black man coming to you live from deep in the heart of Texas, the Gotham City of the South. Thank you for joining me. We ask you to like, we ask you to share, we ask you to subscribe to the channel, making sure you click on the notification button so you know when we go live. Thank you very much. We appreciate the viewership to this point. We appreciate the subscribers to this point, and we always will. Today is May 16, 2022, and it has been a momentous day, as so many of them are and will be in the near future. I'm going to see if I can take you out of where we are nationwide right now with all the violence from coast to coast. I'm going to ask you to engage with me on a flight of fancy, if you will, an exploration of an alternate universe, if you will, an alternate reality. Now, by now, most of you have become aware of the controversy regarding critical race theory. Those who speak in favor of it, those who are vehemently opposed to it. And I want you to take careful note of the academic Negroes that take the side of opponents of critical race theory and listen to some of the things they say. And when I talk about academic Negroes, you will know who they are. These are university professors, usually, journalists, commentators who, seeking acceptance from white society, denigrate critical race theory. I'm not here to talk about critical race theory. I'm here to get you to use your imagination. White people, black people, any people. Use your imagination. Read the title. The title reads, Extract Racism from America. And what do you have left? Extract racism from American history. Extract, remove, make disappear. Whatever you think racism is from the American experience, what do you have left? I'll tell you what you have left. If the Europeans who settled on these shores somehow forgot everything they knew about racism as they crossed the Atlantic and landed on these shores and met the Native Americans of the northeastern seaboard. Without racism as a motivating factor, they would not have annihilated the people whose land they appropriated, literally annihilated. Because when you think of the scores of Native American tribes that populated the northeastern quadrant of this country in the middle to late 17th century, whose tribes no longer exist for all practical purposes, and were so brutally annihilated, you would still have those people living in that area. Native American tribes, Iroquois, Assiniboine, et cetera, et cetera. I could go on, but I'm not an expert on the northeastern Native American tribes, Mohicans. Without racism, well, you have to ask yourself, what would the European settlers have done? they'd have probably gone native, for want of a better way of putting it. They'd have learned how to live off the land the way the Native Americans did. They would have learned government, which they did. That's why we have a Congress. The Native Americans had bicameral houses of government before the Europeans came. They would have learned to live in harmony with the land and to preserve the land. The idea of land ownership, farms, estates, if you will, would never have been a question. Any crops the Europeans wanted to grow, they would have had to pick themselves. Any rice they planted, they would have had to harvest. Any tobacco they planted, they would have had to harvest. They would not have gone to Africa to import slaves in the early 18th century to clear the land, to settle the land, to plant the crops, to harvest the crops, which made tobacco and rice and other crops profitable to the European settlers in our reality. But in another reality, white people would have been working the fields. How likely is that? Would they have gotten tired of doing all that back-breaking, laborious work and gone back to Europe? We don't know. It didn't happen that way. If the Europeans had stayed in the New World and established some sort of government alongside their Native American co-inhabitants, because there was no racism, it's not likely that there would have been a trail of tears from the southern United States. The Creek, the Choctaw, the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Seminole would not have been forcibly removed from the southeastern United States and Florida to the Oklahoma territories on a trail of tears. If you don't know what the Trail of Tears is, I don't have time to tell you about it now. But growing up in Oklahoma, that's one of the first lessons we learned. And it was terrible. But without racism as a basis for governing and living with people unlike them, it's likely that the Europeans would have learned to live with the Creek, Choctaw, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Seminole. Would have been a completely different society. But it's not likely that the southern United States, southeastern United States, would have produced as much cotton as it did, because I think we can probably all agree that white people would not have made good field hands. White people would not have stood up to cultivating and picking cotton from can't see to can't see. That is, from before the sun was up until practically the sun was down. I don't think that white people are constituted like that. That's not a slur. It's not a slur. I also don't think that white people would have done it for free. I don't think that white people would have enslaved each other and whipped each other and bred each other and brutalized each other, people who looked like them, to make cotton king in the South. Therefore, the United States would not have been the power that it grew to be during the early to middle 19th centuries. It would have been a completely different country. Without racism to motivate them, it's not likely that the European, now American settlers, whatever America would have looked like, would have expanded west to wipe out the Sioux and the nations, the great nations of the north, of the middle western tribes or land or territories. Not likely, because they wouldn't have been racist. They wouldn't have obliterated them and put their remnants on reservations the way it happened on our timeline, in our reality. It's not likely. that they would have gone to Mexico and taken Mexico from the Spanish and the Mexicans. And therefore, cotton cultivation would not have grown in what we know of as Texas today. But once again, you have to exercise imagination. I don't know what they would have done in Texas. I guess they could have still raised cattle, but Texas was not built on beef. Texas was built on cotton. That's not something that people really understand. They watch Westerns and they believe in our timeline, they watch Westerns and they believe the Texas economy was based on beef and cattle, and driving those doggies north to Kansas. No, what built Texas was plantations and cotton. And as little as white people would have enjoyed harvesting cotton in the southeastern United States, they certainly wouldn't have enjoyed it in Texas. It's too hot. Once again, we're just engaged in a flight of fancy here. So keep working your imagination with me. Remember, imagination is the only key to the future. Without it, there is no future. With it, all things are possible. Okay? Okay. Now, that means that, of course, there wouldn't have been any Black people in this country unless they voluntarily immigrated and came over here to work. But just like the white people in the South who might have wanted to pick cotton, or in Texas who might have wanted to pick cotton, you would have had to pay them. And I don't think that raising cotton with paid labor would have been as profitable as raising it with slave labor. I think you don't even have to be a leading economist to figure that out. How much would you pay a person to pick cotton? You'd have to pay a white person. So you see, if you think about it, here in Texas, what kind of world we would see today without the racism that made Texas what it is today? Well, the Comanche and the Apache and all the other tribes that inhabited Texas would still be watering their ponies along the Colorado River. Oh, they'd still be fighting. The Native Americans of the Northeast fought. You know, that's why there were tribes. Tribal people fight. But as far as I can understand, many Native American tribes engaged in the kind of warfare that we don't understand today. What they did was they'd line up members of their tribe on one side, and they'd line up against members of another tribe across a pasture, and they'd ride toward each other, and they'd take sticks. They call them coup sticks, C-O-U-P. And they'd swing their sticks and they'd hit a member of another tribe on the arm or the chest or maybe even the head. I don't know. Some of you experts will know. They called it, if you landed a blow on your enemy, he was essentially out of the battle. And he had to go back to the other side and just watch everybody else still counting coup on each other, hitting each other with sticks. This at a time when Europeans were slaughtering each other by the hundreds and the thousands in wars for territory. Can you imagine a world like that today? What kind of world this would be today? What kind of nation this would be today? The buffalo would be so thick, you could walk on their backs from Mexico to Canada. There wouldn't have been a need to wipe out the buffalo to drive the Native Americans into starvation. There wouldn't have been a need for that. There probably wouldn't have been a need to cross the Rockies and take the western states. That probably would still be Mexico. This is all imagination, of course, because the Europeans brought their racism with them. It's not very widely known, but the racism and the brutality that was exercised against the Native Americans in this country by the English and the French was largely learned by the English when they settled Ireland. Now, today, it's hard to differentiate, for an American anyway, the difference between an Irishman and an Englishman. But back in the day, the British looked down on the Irish much like white people look down on black people today. And in settling Ireland, the British used practically every tactic they used against the Native Americans in this country, except wholesale extermination. And trust me, they tried. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. These are the kinds of things we are going to do here. We're going to exercise our minds. We're going to exercise our imagination. This is what happens when you extract, draw out, take away racism from the European settlers' mentality on coming to these shores. Unimaginable, you might say. Without things the way they were, we wouldn't have built this mighty nation. We wouldn't have built the civilization that we know so well. We wouldn't have cars. We wouldn't have planes. We wouldn't have so much that we enjoy today. Of course, there wouldn't have been a civil war. There wouldn't have been a Spanish-American war. There probably wouldn't have been a world war, one or two. But we can dream, can't we? This has just been a flight of fancy, something to think about, especially for those who, number one, don't believe that racism exists. If it didn't, we wouldn't be where we are today. As well as those who feel that the development of this nation had nothing to do with racist attitudes. Of course it did. Nobody can deny that. And sitting here in Texas, we know it all too well. We're going to sign off now. We're a little over time. I'd like to keep these down to 15 minutes at this point. I didn't put the link up, but we will in the future. Remember to like, remember to share, remember to subscribe, clicking on that notification bell. In the meantime, we'll be back at 8 p.m. I'm going to get ready to eat. I'm hungry. But 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, we will return for another, we hope, shorter presentation. In the meantime, if you're still a human being, don't let anybody make a monkey out of you. Oh, they'll try. They'll slip in there during that 2-hour period and try their darndest to make a monkey out of you. Don't make a monkey out of yourself, because then you have only yourself to blame. Take care of each other. Take care of yourselves in peace. Always peace. Thank you.